work because they are being affected, delays in transportation, and I'll allow for my other colleagues to speak about that because at least we have our border agency here, one of our border agencies from Customs, who will speak to that. And essentially, I would say that it is affecting all of us from different standpoints, whether you're a manufacturer or a consumer, because like I said, we are all consumers. And it is a situation it's a situation that requires immediate reaction and the way forward. And I believe that, and I don't want to delve into much of the discussion, but just to say that the government has been very proactive in that regard. As I believe that you would have heard, and all those who are listening would have heard, in recent fora, the Minister of International Trade at the time, Minister Phipps, was very passionate about that very subject. I was asked about the global supply chain. As the Minister of International Trade, she herself understands, and given her historical background, she knows what it is when there are bottlenecks, when there are shortages, how it affects the private sector. And using her initiative and in support with the government and of course the Ministry of Finance, she would have spearheaded a meeting. I think Everest would have been here, representative from Customs, just Monday, where we would have engaged the private sector, because we recognize in treating with this, we can't do it alone. The government, and when I say we, I mean the government cannot talk to itself. We have to engage and speak to persons who are affected. So we have persons, the port services, we have the tropical shippings, we have the importers, all those persons who are feeling the brunt, because while we sit at others and devise policies, we are not the ones actually interacting in that regard. We feel it as a consumer, but in terms of actually treating and providing for the suppliers, then they are the ones who have a different perspective and a different view. So that meeting was held. It was a first start, and I must say it was a very productive engagement. And it was just, like I said, the beginning of other engagements, because we recognize that there are a lot of outstanding matters that we have to treat with in terms of our food security. There's a concern on the government's end. And so that is what we would have started off. So I'm happy to be here and with my colleagues who can bring a different perspective as to what the impact really is. As a consumer, I know there are delays if in terms of your orders, but we have the customs and the importers like Everest who will probably give a different perspective, because I'm sure they do get the brunt of our consumers. Why are my stuff not here? You have to, even when you go to the supermarket, and you see some shelves empty. You may not realize, but it is all because of the fact that we are experiencing some serious challenges as it relates to the global supply chain. So I want to rest here and allow my other colleagues to speak to the direct impact from where they sit.
Right, of course we know that, and you mentioned it while you were speaking, Mrs. Warner Weeks, that globalization, of course, came about with the intention of creating a level playing field. But at the very same time, we know that those of us in developing countries, we do very little manufacturing, and we import most of our goods. Even agriculture, where we should be doing more, our import bill is very high, even with respect to agricultural products. So we import almost everything because we manufacture very, very little. And as a result of that, small island developing states are impacted more significantly than those industrial countries where goods, where they are manufacturing a lot, and they can, because everything has to come by a container, by a ship, and all of that sort of a thing. Which leads me to Mr. Greenaway. You are at the port, you are at customs, and you have been seeing the trends in terms of what is happening, delays in shipping, all of that. And maybe you can speak to us in terms of what impact that has had on customs and so on.
Okay, thank you, Leswan. Now, the Customs Department of St. Kitts and Nevis, we are mandated by law to collect duty and taxes, revenue for the government. This revenue would be used for things like infrastructure, healthcare, education, capital projects, etc. Now, in 2018, just a comparison, we had imports value to the tune of over $877 million. Now, compared to 2021, we are seeing that drop by over $200 million. We have had value imports up to $647 million, right? Now, in speaking to a representative of one of the supermarkets, we have learned that the freight, pre-COVID, the freight on one 20-foot container was average between 4,000 and 6,000 EC dollars. And that 40-foot container to be shipped, the value was between 8,000 and 10,000 EC dollars. Now, during the pandemic, we have seen the freight increase now, where a 20-foot container would cost between 8,000 and 10,000 EC dollars, and a 40-foot container would cost now between 12,000 and 15,000 EC dollars. And of course, that cost would be passed on to the consumers ultimately. I've seen it. I've gone to the supermarkets pre-COVID. I would see, for example, cauliflower, for example, would cost $7. During the pandemic, the price increased to $13. So it's not just affecting it's affecting all of us, right? And to say that if we don't get the amount of imports that we see in 2018, we won't make as much money, and the government won't get as much money to do the different projects and stuff like that.
So it is affecting the economy on a whole. Government is collecting less money as a result. And you correctly summed it up. It is the consumer feeling it. The manufacturer is also feeling it, because with global unemployment and with so much, the labor problems, labor shortages, of course, their production costs and so on are going to increase. And they are feeling the crunch as well. The consumer confidence, of course, is being affected when you want certain goods that you're accustomed to have and you cannot have them. You're affected. Maybe some persons have turned even to e-commerce. There has been an uptake in e-commerce. You see people ordering things online and things like that, but even that has its problems as well. Mr. Huggins, you work at TDC. What have been some of the impacts that you have seen? What have been some of the shortages, maybe in building materials and things like that? And how is that impacting the consumer?
Yeah, thank you, that's right.
And the company?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank SKNS for this particular initiative. I think the program is timely. And by extension, I would like to thank the members of the executive of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce for having me represent the private sector as it relates to this very important topic. But to answer your question, Lesroy, we have been having our struggles. And Jasmine spoke earlier about the meeting that we were all a part of on Monday, hosted by Minister Phipps. And one of the things that actually came out from some of the members were the fluidity of the situation. And that is something that was reiterated throughout our presentations, that the situation still remains fluid. And as it relates to the building material cost, we are struggling. We have to be juggling between suppliers, and we are juggling to find not only the best possible price, but logistically, does it make sense to use this particular shipping liner. Logistically, does it make sense to compile this particular bit of inventory with that particular bit of inventory? So we are plagued with the challenges of carrying our inventory levels far beyond the forecasted period. It now forces us to have to expand the parameters of our demand planning. Where we once would have had to plan 3 months in advance of a particular supplier or commodity, we may have to extend that by as much as 100% at times, right? I can give you case in points where there are few commodities that we may have forecast 5-6 months out, that we forecast to arrive in December, that we still have not received on island.
Yes.
Which of course impacted our revenues, as our businesses would have forecasted those sales into the peak sales period. Of course, we are fortunate to have the government extending the VAT days to us. Some of the sales managers would have had their ducks lined up and forecast these commodities within this particular period, but unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition because we simply did not have the goods, not as a result of negligence or incompetence, but rather the realities of the global supply issues. So some of the issues that we have experienced that is common, we've been hearing it in the media all the time. You have labor shortages from the very beginning. So a supplier may have to shut down an entire assembly line. A manufacturer rather might have to shut down an entire assembly line because the entire team may be suffering from COVID. You have deaths within the system. You also may have the protocols in the particular country. You have the shortages in raw materials, of course, and that is as a result again of the labor shortage. So I think it was Jasmine alluded to, a step 1, step 2 process regarding the simplicity of the supply chain, but as simple as it sounds, it is also very complicated. There are the logistical challenges, the extension of the lead times as a result of the logistical challenges, and getting the goods from point A to point B within a particular time frame. It doesn't always materialize the way we would want it to because, again, we have these particular challenges. And with the logistical challenges, Mr. Greenaway spoke about the inflation of the cost for freight. Well, he mentioned some figures that represented 100% increase, but to the listening audience, it is not 100% increase. In some instances, we have seen it as high as 500%. Mr. Greenaway is nodding his head in agreement that he probably have seen the same thing. In my presentation in the meeting on Monday, I made reference to some shady deals that we've seen with some of the freight forwarders. And this is not an attack on any of the freight forwarders here because they too are struggling because they have their challenges within the system. But we had situations where, you might be quoted for a particular freight, and then by the time you receive your freight bill, it is 4 or 5 times the amount. So what do you do when you have a situation where your freight value exceeds the value of your commodities, right? And that is a very dangerous precedence, dangerous thing to experience when you have to price things for persons to sell. Now, in my business, in TDC, we are not in the food business, but I can't imagine the challenges that they would have to experience for situations like that, right? We have also seen some challenges where suppliers are now placing more pressure on us and asking for payments up front. So you have your cash flow is automatically affected. What do you need cash to do? You need cash to do everything. You need cash to pay your wages. You need cash to pay your rent. You need cash to pay your warehousing fee. You need tax. You need cash to pay Mr. Greenaway and his team at the Customs and Excise Department, etc. So it affects everything. we had to make some recalibration in our inventory reserves. Inventory best practices suggest that you should turn your inventory at a minimum of 4 times per year, right? It is impossible with the supply chain crisis to have that consistency, because there is no consistency because of how fluid the situations are and how frequent some of the issues are recurring, which is on a supplier by supplier basis, a country by country basis, an industry by industry basis. So there's no straight line in dealing with these particular issues. I touched off on the cash management, the cash flow. The cost to freight ratio, as in the first cost of the items to the freight. Again, I spoke about the dangerous precedents if you're experiencing a freight cost that is far higher or even equal to the actual first cost of the item, right? We also had to be, a number of the businesses have complained about the warehousing fees, right? It's a strain on the entire economy. You have containers or packages that are cleared, or you would like to get your stuff cleared, but the process is very slow because the COVID protocols are in place, are strict and it's tight, not to frustrate people as some people may think, but it is a means to protect us. So again, ladies and gentlemen, we are affected in every way. And I want to use this forum to ask and plead to the general public, let us be more cooperative with companies. We are in this thing together. We are making progress, but the progress is incremental. As I indicated, the situation is fluid, and we are going to continue to put our best foot forward to ensure that we meet your expectations. And the last thing in my opening presentation that I want to emphasize, our idea of normalcy, which was pre-pandemic, we need to get that out of our heads. I've seen after 9/11 crisis, the world was changed forever. And I am seeing the same trends. If we are experiencing an inflation in freight of approximately 500% in some instances, then we are highly likely to not have those prices return to pre-pandemic levels. So we must recalibrate our brains, change our attitudes, discipline ourselves, and prepare for the normalcy post-COVID, because it's going to be here for a while, right?
Right, and Mr. Huggins, the shortage in building materials, lumber, plywood and sheet goods, paint and steel and cement and hard, and all of those things, not only are they impacting TDC,
Right.
but it's impacting the construction sector. And our construction sector is a significant sector that contributes significantly to the economy. And if those things are in short supply, it means that there will be less construction going on. And of course, with less construction going on as well, there is less employment.
Right.
And so it's a whole vicious cycle, if you want to call it that. But the global supply shortages, do we depend too much on China? This dependence on China, I think I began by saying that China actually controls a third of global manufacturing.
Well, let me answer this question. Do we have a choice?
Yes, that is it.
All right.
Yes.
From where we sit,
From where we sit.
how much in reality is how much flexibility do we have when China, just use the population of China for example, right? They technically control everything. It starts there, and the minute that there is a crisis in China, it is automatically going to riffle down to economies as dependent on as ours.
Mm-hmm.
We are plagued by our size. And that is just the reality.
Yes, but it's what I have seen and in reading literature on what is happening currently. Persons there are varying views as to what this crisis has taught us. And some of the things that persons are saying that this is now an opportunity for us to now rethink the way we do things, looking at alternatives, looking at even our neighbors. How do we, in terms of importing, we rely a lot on China, the China-US saga has affected us. And there is the view that we now have to look more inward looking, even in the region. We have to now look at our region. The minister speaks very often of our attempts to engage in the Brazil Partial Scope Agreement, where we have Guyana in the mix and we can use Guyana as one of our platforms for us to import. And that is something that we have to continue to push for. There has been a delay in the discussions, but we intend to continue to pursue it. We have to be more inward looking. I think I read somewhere where they spoke to something about nearshoring. They use the term nearshoring, looking closer to home. And even, I know everything would have said about, do we have a choice? Can we, can we really go elsewhere, or do we have to continue to depend? I do not think we have to depend on things. I think we now have to, and in the private sector, I'm putting out that to you, that look at other options, build alliances elsewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the region, but build alliances at this time, because you would have rightly said that post this pandemic, we are not really going to go back. We have to now think, we have to re-strategize how we do things, because it's not going to be the same, and we cannot. And this has, like I said, it has shown us that we cannot continue to depend on, like we say, hold all our eggs in one basket. Right. We have to now look at options. And even in our cases in Eastern Nevis, we now have to become a little more self-reliant. If we once planted 20 acres, we now have to look at planting 40 acres. Look at the lands that are available. The land use policy comes into play here. We now have to rethink how we are using our lands, because food is staff of life, as that's what they say. And, we are talking about food security issues. We go in the supermarkets all the time. And I refer to this because it's a real thing. At the end of the day, we do not want a crisis where we are talking about food. I mean, every day we're focusing on maybe, the lumber and everything, and that affects us as well. Yeah. But food, we have shortages of food. We can't begin to imagine how that would affect us. Yeah. You could relate to December. I know we have a lot of new businesses coming up and bakers, a lot of people baking and stuff, and we were out of eggs. As simple as we take it, we were out of eggs. And so, these are little things that while the ordinary person may not be thinking that it's global supply crisis, or I don't care too much about that, it is affecting us. It is a reality, and it causes cause for us now to rethink a lot of what we do, even us as consumers. Right. And you have to now plant our own backyard garden. We think about it. Consider doing that. I mean, not all of us would do that in a sustainable way, but these are little things, because each of us would have a role to play. I wanted quickly, Mr. Williams, while my colleague from Customs was speaking, I was saying, this has brought home what we are now struggling to get implemented, and I refer to the Trade Facilitation Agreement that we have signed on to the WTO in 2016, ratified in 2016, which actually purposes for us to implement and have to honor the obligations, and some of that is basically saying we have to see how fast, how efficient, remove all those bottlenecks. Let us see how soon we can get these goods that we order from ship to shelf. Now, how can this happen when we are having these challenges? I mean, it now forces us to find other ways in terms of how we could go about facilitating trade. So it really calls for us to be creative in our thinking and find, like I said, move out of think outside the box and be creative and making sure that we can sustain ourselves. And I think that is something that the government has considered. Hence the reason for the meeting that we held, and as every sort of said, it was a very productive meeting, because we were able to hear what the impacts are, and they were common across the stakeholders. we talk about hiking price, freight costs, and I'm glad that you mentioned the freight costs and you appeal to the audience, listening audience, to, about the freight costs and about the length of time it takes, because of course we see things are being delayed, and especially December when you want to get your gifts.
Right.
And if we were looking at the news, you would hear the toys, the US, from the US end, talking about toys not being able to make it. And even in St. Kitts here, persons were really aggravated when they couldn't get their orders. And I'm glad that you made the appeal about the cost, because very often from where I sit, the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, sometimes I listen to the conversations and people come to visit, and even on the radio stations, people say the price has skyrocketed, everything has skyrocketed. Some of them we have no control over. And I know that you would have indicated, and some of the other importers would have indicated that you try very hard to absorb some of that cost.
Yeah.
But for how long?
Yeah,
And so we have to, and I'll just wrap up here.
Yeah.
We just have to, from the Consumer Affairs Department, continue to educate our people, letting them know that we have to understand what is happening, what is going on, and each manufacturer, each importer will have a different case. And 90% of trade is conducted via sea in terms of the transportation. So we have logistical issues. So we really have no control. So constant education, and I could give that commitment that we'll continue to educate our consumers about the price tag. Some of it we have no control. Some of it is really out of our reach. So at least I have tried my best
We appreciate that, Jasmine.
to put a plug there, because it is the reality.
Yeah.
We have to understand. People go in and I want to say, I said that with my last point, but I want to say too that we have to continue to educate our consumers about choices and about needs versus wants. So we have to make that, because it's right now it comes to choice. It comes to choice. So I'll end here for now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, and thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for batting for us, because we really need that, and it's very good to have the government in the fight with us regarding some of the challenges that we experience in the private sector. But I just wanted to use the opportunity as well, Leslie, to educate the public, because a lot of times we see things on the shelves and you're like, okay, this thing is very expensive. Okay, this company is being unscrupulous or unethical regarding their pricing strategy. And I'm just going to detail to you what goes into the compilation of a landed price. And I would like my good friend sitting right next to Mr. Greenaway to endorse what I'm sharing, because he sees things from the customs perspective. So from the international end, of course, you have the cost of the goods that the supplier can add a commission, the documentation charges, the fuel surcharge, the IMO or hazardous charge, the freight that we spoke about, the insurance charge, the landed charge, and the sales tax. These are the charges from the international end. And the likely charges that you can receive on the local end, you have the accessorial charge, the bottle levy, the bank charges, the brokerage charges, the cargo dues, the chassis charge, the customs overtime. You have to factor in these things. The customs service charge, the consumption tax, the delivery charges, the demurrage, and demurrage is defined as a charge payable to the owner of the chartered ship in respect of failure to load or discharge a ship within the time agreed. And I'm going to come back to this demurrage charge, Jasmine. You remember this conversation?
Yes, I just noted it.
Yes. The environmental levy, the excise tax, the excess storage, fertilizer licenses, that's if you have a fertilizer, forklift charges, handling charges, haulage, inland freight, insurance tax, offloading, port duties, rust charges, stevedoring charges, truckage, terminal handling charges, unstuffage, and wharfage. These are the realities of what our businesses have to face when we have to construct our prices, ladies and gentlemen. On top of that, we still have to pay the value-added tax of 17%, which is paid on the CIF and the import duties. The CIF being the cost, the insurance, and the freight. All right?
Yes, yes. Let me put a pin there. I thought that the 17% value-added tax goes directly to the good. But now what you're saying is that all of these things added, the freight and all of that, and then you charge the 17% on that.
That
I
is
thought
correct.
it was charged directly on the good itself.
No.
So you calculate all of those things, the freight and whatever other charges, and then you get a total there, and then you charge the 17% on that. That is how it is done?
Yeah.
Well,
That's fine.
But some clarity.
That is how it's done at customs. You find all the different taxes first, the import duty, your customs service charge, you add it back to your cost, insurance and freight, and then you take the 17% back. Maybe it's different for TDC.
I thought it was directly on the good.
Yeah,
I
but
didn't know all of those things were included first, and then the 17%.
yes.
The
Yes.
17% is the last tax.
Right.
calculated.
It's the last tax.
It's the last
Tax
tax,
on the
right? So
tax.
when we sell our goods in the private sector, of course, the 17% is collected, is something that we collect on behalf of the government, right? But all of these charges are factored to arrive at the landed cost. And so if you see a pen costs $2, right? Or you might see a pen online that costs $2, or you buy it, the pen might be $2 at your first cost. Based on all of these charges that I just shared with you, right? By the time that pen lands on the island, the pen could cost about anywhere between $7 to $10, because you still have import duties which range between 0 to 75% that is applied to, that is built within the commodity codes that we load into ASCODA system.
And that is why,
Oh, I stand to be corrected. Mr. Gwynner just corrected me. 70%, not 75. So between 0 to 70% are the import duties that are paid on goods here.
and that is why these countries, these developed countries, manufacturing, industrial countries, will continue to have goods at a much cheaper price, because the goods don't have to really be the shipping costs and the freight and all of these things. Developing countries spend a lot of money for these goods that are so much cheaper where they're coming from.
Right.
And so we are, however you put it, we talk about globalization and a level playing field, but we are at a disadvantage. Always at a disadvantage when it comes to trade,
We do not manufacture a lot.
because we do not manufacture a lot.
Exactly.
Most of what we have and most of what we consume are imported. We are going to open up the phone lines. The lines, we didn't open them yet, but somebody wants to call in. And so I would give the numbers: 466-2666. That is 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, and the overseas line is 1-239-645-4500. That is 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls. Working for you, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, this question is looking to the peers of international trade, and I'm happy that you have such a robust panel there. Now, Mrs. Jacqueline Week, you are in charge as the PS of two essential departments, that is the international trade, you have small business and consumer. How are these departments playing a role in terms of helping goods and services in terms of trade? You know, I'm just wondering, like, what is it your departments are doing in terms of educating and helping the consumers? Because I'm sure there are many complaints that come to your department, and I can see these playing key elements in helping and assisting consumers. So I'm just wondering how it's going, or what are the plans going forward in assisting consumers.
Thank you very much. Do you have something else to say? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I recognize the voice, and I won't call the name, but thank you for the question. And if I could paraphrase what you said, how as the Ministry of International Trade, from where I sit, what are we doing to assist from where we sit, Ministry of International Trade, treating with small businesses and treating with, educating the public. Well, I will start by education. Education, if you don't know, then it makes things even more difficult. So we, from the ministry standpoint, have, and we will continue to, and maybe accelerate a more robust communication strategy where we speak to our consumers, educate them as to what is happening. If we should have started the process, and perhaps we can talk after about how we can educate have a panel about how we can educate our consumers as to what goes into the price builder, so that they can have a better appreciation as to what is happening on the ground. At the same time, our small businesses are affected, and we have in the past, and we continue to, even more so now, assist our small businesses in terms of concessions. We recognize that they would be the hardest hit. They are more vulnerable at this time because, of course, they have very limited finance, in terms of collateral, etc. And so we now have to look at access to finance and helping them to build, because even our small businesses, our farmers, or our agro-processors who have their businesses, they are affected now by this, in terms of inputs and supply, packaging, getting their packagings to sell their, to present properly their stuff and to export. Because of course, there are certain standards. You can't just take a plastic and throw it on anything. You have to label it properly, and so they have to. We do not necessarily, at least some of it we do manufacture, but some of their inputs have to be ordered, and so they have these costs that are associated with it. And so we already provide some levels of support for them, and we will continue to do so. We engage them very often, and so that is the intention. This is the start, the conversation that we are having now, and we will continue to make sure that we serve and we continue to execute the mandate that we are called to do from the Ministry of International Trade standpoint. I don't know if any other, my colleague might want to add.
Just to add to what the PS was saying, several years ago, the government introduced the family shopping list.
Yes.
It's a list of items that, basic items like your rice, your flour, your meats, etc. To help ease the burden on the consumers. The government would have waived some of the taxes, the import duty, and the VAT. So it ease the burden on some of the consumers when they're purchasing their items.
And in raising that though, Mr. Williams, we still have to, some of the items in the family shopping list are out of our control even, in terms of, we don't, not everything in the family shopping list we actually produce. So even so, we still might encounter a challenge when it comes to the price. But yes, that is a very good point you raised about the one of the things that the government would have done in terms of the family shopping list, and we would have to continue to educate our people about it. We have a consumer app, the price app, where at least persons can go on and check the prices, make comparisons, where to shop. And we have already made that commitment to even, I know not everybody would have the app, so we have to find various means to reach our customers as to where they should go to shop, how to advise them how to shop, that where and how to shop, to shop smartly, because especially at this time of crisis, we have to be very smart and very wise in how we shop, because we feel it in our pockets.
Right. Of course, when the pandemic just started, we saw what was happening, especially here. People had a concern that goods were going to be in short supply. And and we call it, you saw this sort of a frantic kind of a shopping.
Panic shopping.
Panic buying, panic shopping. And of course, I don't think it only happened here, but it was around the world. And so the shipping capacity was quickly exhausted at the start of the pandemic, because everybody was planning for a big decline in demand. A big decline in demand, and the supply side now was hit hard.
Yes. The supply, it's true.
The supply side was hit, especially with the ports and the warehouses
Congestion,
and the congestion, and workers, of course,
getting
to be
sick.
able to get stuff.
Yes.
And what we're seeing now, is that it's almost as though it's the pendulum has kind of swung.
Yes. So it's frenzy buying. We have frenzy buying and supply not being able to catch up.
That's correct.
Yes, that is exactly what is happening. Put it that way. Everybody is shopping, because people are coming back, people are hopeful, people are buying differently.
Yeah.
I was reading an article some time ago, and it's nothing to do with sickness. I don't know if it's happening here, but because we have to now adjust to what is happening in post-pandemic, we have to work from home. So, and we have to be comfortable. So I was reading somewhere that persons, at least internationally, they're actually buying homes and fitting their homes with furniture. Now, if you have a challenge with lumber and stuff, well, where the challenge could be, but they're fitting their homes with furniture, they're fitting their homes with, facilities where they can get more computers, even their businesses. But we still see where there could be a challenge, because if there is a backlog in the supply of the computers that you want to outfit your home with, the furniture, there's still a challenge. So it's almost everywhere you turn, there's the supply demand, and we have to find a balance somewhere. I just thought I'll mention that.
Mr. Gwynaway, in terms of the backlog, working for you, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Leroy,
Yes, good afternoon.
and the team there. I would like to say this. When we dial the number and the operator take up the call, we are holding on too long while I elaborating. Take the call him and then I elaborate after we don't say. No, I hear the man there from the custom. I think he's from the custom. He said that the containers, when they come in, we know that. And the goods come out, the government get a tax from what was in the container. But now the people, the suppliers of the container, they want the money up front. So if the government don't have anything to make tax, to pay them up front for the container, then the government ain't gonna get the money. Well, I am saying this. Up in Afghanistan, the main source where the government get a lot of money from is opium that they make cocaine from. And by planting the opium, the farmers and planting the opium, the country make a lot of taxes from the farmers them. And then they make what they want from the opium. Well, I'm saying this now. Why don't the government, since marijuana is legal now, why they don't utilize our land and plant marijuana and sell abroad and get an income from that? They can't sit back and let them big countries who selling the marijuana, selling it and making money from it, planting it and making money, and they want to tell we small countries, oh, you can't plant this yet and you can't do that. Forget them. Our country, plant your marijuana and making money from it, because see what the COVID do with the tourists board them? When they can't come here, they can't get the money from tourism. That is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
You want to talk? Okay, well, I would not necessarily directly respond. Like the callers asked, he made suggestion to plant the marijuana. I wouldn't say plant the marijuana. I would say let us diversify. Let us, use opportunities to do other, plant. Be accustomed to planting the regular thing. Let us look at what is possible, and this would require us to engage with our farmers. At the meeting we actually had representatives from the farmers, I think the Farmers Corporation and the cooperative, and they are very outward looking. I mean, and they are anxious to now respond to what is happening, to the crisis that is happening. So I'm sure they will come up with ideas as to all the things that they can plant, because one of the things that we know is happening is that very often our farmers are planting the same thing at the same time. They don't, while they are and I hope I don't get knocked for that, but while they have, the cooperatives, they are, they need to now talk to each other and strategize. Because if you want to be everyone planting tomatoes, and you end up have a glut in the market, and then you see what is happening. So we have to continue the conversation, because we now have to talk about wastage. What do we do with the stuff that during the summer, for example, we have a lot of mangoes that wasting in the guts. Now we now have to talk about agro-processing. We have to develop now a market for that. The uses of mango chutney, mango whatever. And just look at, and we don't have to look very far in the region. We see a lot of this happening in Dominica, in Trinidad, in Barbados, using the excess, or what we call wastage, to create. And this COVID pandemic has, of course, forced us to become creative, etc.
Right. Now, Mr. Guinea was asking, how are you dealing with the, do you have backlogs at the port because of basically what is happening? And how are you dealing with those backlogs?
Well, in terms of the backlogs, we don't have backlogs per se with the commercial items. We have a little backlog with the personal goods, because of COVID. A lot of officers have been home, contracted the COVID, so put a strain on our officers. And to remedy that, we try to work a little overtime on the weekends, a little late into the evenings to get the backlog done. So it's near normal now. But in terms of the commercial items, there's no backlog.
Right. So because one of the things we are speaking about is in terms of delays in shipping, but then we also can have delays in terms of customs and goods getting cleared and all of that sort of a thing, which basically adds to the
demurrage.
Yes.
The demurrage charges.
Yes.
Yes.
We try our best to facilitate. We have different systems. We have pre-releases. You could get the goods before you do your entry or your declaration. And TDC utilizes that a lot. So we don't try to hold up the commercial people too much.
Yeah, Leslie, can I just add something? Yeah,
sure.
Well, just to kind of educate the public a bit more about the demurrage charges, for example. We no longer have the luxury, and everything happened around the COVID time, and it's just very unfortunate. But the reality is what the reality is. We don't have the luxury of picking up the phone and calling a particular freight forward and say, hey, please waive these charges. Have a little mercy on us. We don't have that because it is now out of their hands. As a matter of fact, it is handled third party, right? So the power is now taken from the shipping companies who would have always had that bit of flexibility with the businesses, and it's turned over into almost like a revenue collection business. And it's unfortunate because I listened to one of my colleagues speaking just on Monday right after our meeting, and was talking about how high their charges were, and tens of thousands of dollars, US dollars. These things now have to be factored into your costing. Now, if you don't get these invoices in time, right, because inventory is actually capitalized, right? It forms part of the company's assets until the sale is conducted. So if you don't capture these charges within a particular window, right, that now hits your expenses. So, as the saying go, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So this is another reality of what we are experiencing as businesses. Again, I would appeal to the public, work along with the businesses, try to do as much domestically as possible, because it's all a part of economics, and we all have a vested interest in keeping the monies circulating in the country as much as possible. And Jasmine, while you're here, I mean, even government, I would like to appeal to government, utilize the local businesses as much as possible. Where we can source things locally, let us source this stuff locally and give back to the businesses, so we the businesses can give back to our people, right? And that is how you keep the ball rolling. So it's not just about food security alone. It's everything.
Yes.
It's everything, and this is something that businesses here are passionate about. Support each other.
Yes.
Support each other.
Yes, we have to support each other. That is good. And I think, and I'm not saying that, but sometimes we talk about supporting each other, and we also have to make sure that we have the supply intact, because very often, and I would want to use even smaller companies. You have an issue and you're excited about supporting the smaller man, but you buy today and then next week you go and they don't have it. So a lot of it has to do with reliability. You spoke to it at some point. You have to be consistent in terms of supply. And we recognize that we have to support our small businesses. We encourage our small businesses to venture into new ways of doing things and even expanding their businesses, be out thinking about exporting their services. But of course we have standards, and we will continue to educate our people. As a matter of fact, I think that we are in the process of devising a program where we will continue to have a weekly program where we educate our populace, our consumers, with purchasing power, about access to finance and how to manage your finances. Because while everyone might be jumping into opening a business, it's not just about opening a business, it's sustaining that business. Right. So you have to be able to manage your monies, manage it, manage your income and saving, and continue to invest. And we have done it. We continue to do that from the Small Business Development Center. We actually have sessions where we educate our small businesses and our new small businesses as to how to save, how to record. Because I mentioned we need to look at our businesses in terms of access to finance, so that they can expand their businesses. But very often, a lot of the challenge for our small businesses is that they do not keep proper records. So the bank asks for their last 2 years, in terms of their receipts, and they don't have it. So we have sought to do that. We have been teaching them, and COVID has taught us a lot. We jumped into high gear once we had the lockdown, and we started to have online sessions with our small businesses, how to save, how to invest, and not just to start a business because your neighbor is doing it. Be creative. Think if your neighbor is making pepper sauce, why not think of manufacturing the bottles that go into pepper sauce instead of doing pepper sauce as well? Add on, value added. We speak about that. But we will continue, we'll be hearing us, at least from the ministry standpoint, in terms of how we can educate our people, because education is key. You have to educate them, how to budget, etc. And it's a work in progress. So, Mr. Huggins, whenever you're ready, we can all have another conversation of this nature in terms of how because we each have a role to play.
Right.
The customs end, we have a role to play. And like I said, I know that very often people, gosh, the customs, the stuff takes so long to go. And you have an obligation to get this stuff from ship to shelf. People want the items. The items are empty. But somebody said, oh, that shed is locked down. Everybody up there have COVID. How do you cheat with it? We now have to become, creative in how we do things.
Yes, and that creativity, I know that a number of companies, to deal with the global supply chain, they're trying to improve, enhance their logistics processes and turn into technology and digitization. That is basically happening. But on the other hand, too, the global supply chain has brought about a shortage in terms of microchips and all of that sort of thing, and especially manufacturing companies that rely heavily on technology, making cars and things like that they are affected. I remember early in the pandemic, right here in St. Kitts, somewhere up the industrial side, we had to be making certain
parts,
to send to the United States because they were in short supply.
Yes. So you see that there's potential, and I would want if I use, but we are, like, I always have to come back to how interconnected and interdependent we are. If I use my iPhone, if you have an iPhone, I would use the iPhone because that's the iPhone's made in China, yes, and it says it's made in China, but is it really made in China? We have maybe some different parts of it, the face, the scale come from other maybe China assembled it, but if the packaging would have come from it, so you see the connection we are waiting for. If there's maybe a slowdown, a shortage somewhere, we see the impact, and I come back to the point that we rely a lot on imports from China. You ask the question, and I'm sure if we answer this, what next?
Okay,
what is
to tackle the global supply chain, does that mean, Mrs. Warner-Weeks, that we have to look to other source markets? We have to look to other source markets for some of our products, because if we are accustomed of getting, one product from a source market, and it simply means that source market has been affected, then we have to look elsewhere to get that product.
Yes. Yes, I said it earlier. I hinted at looking within, inward looking, even in the region. I think it is suggested, and a lot of the literature would point to where we need to go now. If from the CARICOM perspective, we need to look at ourselves because we have the potential. Maybe not St. Kitts and Nevis, but we are part of the CARICOM region, so we can source it from our neighbors. Every talk about supporting our own, and our own, for me, from where I sit, mean our CARICOM people as well. It may not necessarily be our own within St. Kitts and Nevis, our own within the region, because we do have some other manufacturers in the region that produce just good quality stuff. So we realize that we have to be now not looking, like I said, spread our wings, look at alternatives, create new alliances, build new trade partners. Diversify our global supply chains, in other words, and become even more self-reliant and creative. And I think that is the way we need to be looking at now. We need to really change our pattern because we are not going back to the same place. It's not happening.
Mr. Gwynaway, there's a shortage in shipping containers for transportation? And that is what is contributing to the added freight cost?
No, as Mr. Huggins would have mentioned, it is labor, logistics, if you don't have the men to drive the trucks, you don't have the men to load the vessels, the container would be sitting on the dock for a period of time. And if it sits on the dock for a period of time, that's an extra cost.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, there is a shortage of containers as well.
Yes, that is what I'm trying to
there is a shortage, and it is adding to it.
We don't have enough containers for the shipment of raw materials and certain products.
Right, and we sometimes it's almost like you're playing a game or Russian roulette or something because it's like you're just waiting. You have goods at a manufacturer facility, just waiting there to be collected indefinitely, Jasmine.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And you're talking to the different shipping liners, and it's almost like who comes first win, right? Who pulls up this stuff at the supplier's facility is who win. And sometimes you might have to. The shipping liner you decide to go with might be couple hundreds or even four figures higher than your primary shipper, but you have no choice but to take what you get because the people need the goods and the demand is high. I had a supplier who wrote us over the weekend and was basically saying, well, these are the demands, right? We would have achieved X amount of figures worth of sales, but unfortunately we have to be realistic because we just don't have the material or the manpower or the scope to supply the demand, right? So it's an upside down, on the side, all over effect. And that is why I want again to reiterate to the public, this situation is very fluid. It changes by the second. So in my line of work, I have to be there to accept the call from the supplier in the east at, ridiculous hours. I have to make a decision real quickly, because if you wait, your wait can push you back another month or two or indefinitely, right? So it's go ahead.
What kind of inflation are we basically looking at? What for 2022?
It's frightening.
Well, what I can tell you is that sometimes I'm scared to open my emails. Sometimes I'm scared to take the phone call, because some of the suppliers in different businesses would build that relationship, that emotional relationship with the business. They understand what goes on in the business, and they understand our customers and its base. And in a lot of instances, because of where we are located in the region, we are classed within the region. So they understand what is happening, and they are feeling the same squeeze, and they are trying to see how they can pacify it as much as possible. But the reality is what the reality is. It is a crisis, and we can only do so much.
Yeah, because with inflation, of course, that is going to affect. You began by saying that, the revenues that you collect at customs are down because of what is happening, because of the shortages and so on. But on top of the shortages, with the inflation, you are going to have less consumption of goods, because people are not going to be able to afford it. And so therefore, your revenues are going to be affected even further.
Yep.
Yes, there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah.
This situation has taught us, and I think if I could refer to the song, COVID taught us a lesson. It continues to teach us a lesson. Letter of self-reliability. It is now time for us, and I believe we're close to wrapping up, but it's now time for us to consider a paradigm shift towards a more resilient and sustainable food system. Every says not food alone, it's a lot of things, yes. But food is, critical in this regard. We all have a role to play. How I see this playing out is that each of us, all of us have a stake in this issue. As consumers, as producers, as manufacturers, we have a stake, and from the government standpoint and the private sector, we all have a stake. I mentioned earlier the private sector now has to come up with new ideas to become creative, strengthen their value chain operations, etc. I believe also that when it comes to agriculture, we need to know before in a closer relationship between the agriculture and the tourism sector. These are linkages that we have to know form to help to promote our local support, and it in turn will help to build the tourism sector, which we know was greatly impacted because of the pandemic. So there's a lot that has to be done. I mean, we now have to, my colleague from Customs have to either push the agenda for the trade facilitation. We have to now go online. Mr. Williams talk about doing a lot of things. A one-stop shop. Sit from where you're at on all the border agencies, yourself from Customs, us from the Bureau, us from the Bureau. I mean, all those the port services, sitting from where we are. From where you are and getting things done, rather than having to pop here, you go here, you have to go by agriculture, your stuff come in and you have to get a license, you have to, these things you now have to be thinking of having this one-stop shop. We talk a lot about it, but we really need to make sure, and I know there are some efforts being made from Customs. Customs is on the National Trade Facilitation Committee, which we have, that seeks to implement the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and so I know they're very proactive, electronic documentation, etc. We're going in that direction, but maybe we now have to accelerate the process And sometimes as you take one step forward, it's like 2 steps back because you try to do things, but then the things that have the impact of COVID still continues. It's, you know, it's just...
It's going to continue for a while, and in order for us to get back on track or to some semblance of normalcy, it's going to require a broad-based labor market recovery.
Yes.
Broad-based labor market requirement. We are dealing with a health pandemic.
And that is what we are dealing with today.
And it's going to have rippling effects for years to come, what has basically happened.
Yes,
And
said,
while we're dealing with a health pandemic, we still have to, because now with all of this, shortage of this and shortage of that, raw materials, and you can't get certain foods, you can't get medicines, and all of that sort of a thing that are in short supply. On top of that, with the additional financial stress that people will have to go through, brought about by inflation, it simply means that people can become even sicker, and their health affected even more because of what is happening.
yeah, we hope. Well, I think the idea of being forward-looking and being proactive is critical, because today we are speaking about COVID-19, the pandemic, and perhaps next year we'll be speaking about another thing, some other exogenous factor which we have no control over. So for me, we now have to start doing the work to prepare for other. It may not be a pandemic of this nature, it might be something else, and still would affect our global supply chain. So we have to be proactive. I think we have to collaborate, and I'm really happy that we have started to build that committee that will continue the public-private sector dialogue. And I believe very much in that, because, like I said, government, we are the ones who devise all the policies, but we are not necessarily the ones who are actually trading. We have to speak with the FSs, the TDCs, and we have to continue this engagement, and not just talk, but let us put our talk into action, because I think ultimately that is what needs to happen. We need to, our approach has to be swift, strategic, and very deliberate in terms of who we target and what we get done because of this.
Okay.
I use that as my closing statement.
Yes, no, Everest, I began by asking you, in terms of TDC, what are some of the shortages that you are seeing, and some of the goods where you are seeing there is inflation?
Okay. Well, we are experiencing shortages in a lot of the building material areas. Of course, I spoke about the fact that we are plagued with our size, right? And I empathize a lot with smaller businesses, and because you only have X amount of resources to work with. So you might have an instance where a supplier might tell you the minimum order requirement, or the MOQ, as we like to call it, is X amount of cubic feet, right? You must be able to meet this minimum requirement in order for your goods or your order to qualify for a shipment, right? You might have to now go and employ a freight forwarder to do your mixing and your consolidating, and that creates a lot more challenges for the smaller business. Now, we might have a situation where I might be trying to order some lumber. I might want a particular size of lumber. This might be my bread and butter item. However, either you're out of stock or you only have this amount of resources. Now I have a flat rack that I have to fill. What am I going to fill it with? I'm going to have to fill it with a substitute item that probably is going to take about, with the amount of inventory I'm ordering, it's going to take me about a year and a half to sell it. What decision do I make? Am I going to compromise losing sales because, this is the MOQ? And this is some of the reality. We're having challenges with steel as well. That is another problem, not just
But is
with
the supply impacted?
I beg your pardon?
Is the supply impacted with steel?
Of course.
or the impact is coming more from the energy costs?
The impact is coming more from the labor costs, because you may have, remember, a lot of these persons, they are laborers, right? A lot of it is manual, and they are the ones who are more likely prone to be exposed to COVID. So you have that situation. Now, we have to also look at, we have to look at what's going on around the world right now. I mean, very soon we have to brace ourselves because I think it's the Build Back Better. That was the act that was passed, right? Or that's the one that was blocked in the US.
Build Back Better.
Yeah, the Build Back Better, right. I mean, you're talking about, a $2 trillion project that is going to be taking place in the United States. They're going to be trying to pull as much resources as possible. And then you also have the inflation. So that is some of the impact I have with steel. Steel is up by about 60% since the pandemic, right? Have we passed those prices on to the consumers? And that's the questions we have to ask all the time, because a lot of the things that we're experiencing, in order to cushion the impact, we absorb some of the cost, right? So, and is it practical for our businesses? No, it's not. But notwithstanding, we're in this thing together. It is a very difficult situation. It's a tough pill to swallow, but the reality is what the reality is.
It's a difficult situation, and I'm happy that we're having this discussion, because people out there have heard the talk saying, oh Lord, these businesses, they're wicked. People don't have money already, and they're raising their prices.
But that's why
every time I go in the supermarket, the price is going up, and all kinds of things. And the consumers are very, very disgruntled. And a program like this, in helping them to understand why there is inflation of costs, might help them to see things from a different perspective. As the PS said, of course, help them to budget better, to look at their needs and not just their wants, and to cut back on certain things and so on, because of what basically is happening.
I mean, I was about to say, and I'm happy you said that, and I feel appreciated that we have, qualified person in the media, and even Jasmine and her team, and who lobbies on behalf of the businesses, because it's not everything that you see you have to take at face value. I was privy to something that was circulating on social media a few months ago, and it was accusing a business of jacking up their prices in time for the VAT day. And, I did my little investigation about that particular product, because I use a product online as the example. And when I saw the history of the item, I noticed that there was an increase in the landed cost by a significant amount. And then you have some businesses, and I'm giving a little education now, who pricing structure is based on what you call a weighted average, and some businesses whose pricing structure is based on the last receiving cost. Either way has its impacts on how the goods are sold, right? Now, if you have a particular structure in your organization for your pricing structure, and you come across something that is significantly higher as a result of the risk that we discussed earlier, or the compilation of stuff that goes into the pricing, then automatically you're going to have to make some adjustments on your prices, right? Because if you don't pay attention to these things, you may very well run the risk of selling your goods below the landed cost, which is abominable in retail. You ought not to sell your goods below what cost you landed for, else why are you in business?
Yeah.
So I cannot put it over any plainer. So rather than, and I can understand, if you don't know, you just don't know, which is the definition of ignorance. If you don't know, you just don't know. But I would encourage everybody to, as much as possible, try to educate yourselves around how prices are structured. I mean, from where I sit on this forum, I wanted to use this platform to share information with you so you can make better decisions and have a better understanding of what businesses have to go through.
Yes. Mr. Greenaway, what is the forecast for the Customs Department going forward?
Well, I mean, the government already set their targets, and we would try to meet those targets. But you know, what I would like to say is that we understand that the government needs revenue to pay its bills. We understand the private sector also needs revenue to pay their bills. You know, but if there could be some dialogue between the two, and if they could reach, you know, some kind of balanced middle ground, and ultimately, you know, pass on the benefits to the consumer, you know, that would be good.
But we're expecting things to get better. Isn't that we hold hope out that as the year progresses, that things will get better, and some of the bottlenecks that we are experiencing, you know, would be decreased?
Well, I wouldn't want us to become complacent and say, well, things will get better, so it's okay, and not respond. I think we need to now put things in place just in case things don't get better, at least in the short term. We have to plan for the short, the medium, and the long term, because like I said, there are other exogenous factors that can affect us. It might not be the pandemic, it could be something else. And just so, as before I make my part in, before I depart, perhaps I need to remind our listeners that the ministry's intention is to have weekly business programs, at least to better educate our consumers about the purchasing power, finance, education and shopping, budgeting, taxes, business development, etc. I think this is critical, because if you have that information, then you can now plan going forward. If we are to become more self-sustainable, we have to now try to help ourselves. And the small business sector, very often, it gets hit harder because, like I said, you know, limited assets and limited finance, etc. But it is one of the driving forces into the economy in terms of its contribution to our GDP. So we have to provide that level of support. So it is our intention to continue to lend that support, and at the same time, which is our duty to provide that information to our consumers in terms of what they need to do, their needs versus want, etc. Because and perhaps we can partner. This panel, we can partner in terms of having another discourse in terms of consumers, how they are affected, because it's going to be a while in coming. I'm not that I'm pessimistic, but I would want everything to dissipate, but it's going to be a while. It is felt that supply is going to take a long time in coming back, while demand continues to escalate and people become excited about, you know, so start to shop in a frenzy. Supply is going to be a little tardy in coming back to normalcy, so we really have to prepare ourselves.
Do you think that it was a huge mistake for shipping companies to probably close down, and some of them slowed the operations because, of course, some factories and cities went into lockdown and shut down production, and they too stopped with shipping and all of that? Do you think that was a huge mistake, Everest? Because the thing about it is that the market didn't stop. The market did not stop demanding to be supplied.
Yeah.
It simply shifted its demands elsewhere.
I mean, in fairness to
It had to happen.
in fairness to companies generally taking action. I mean, we, even as a panel, as we sit here today, we still don't know what the end game of this pandemic is going to be. So everybody had to take some sort of risk, right? I can recall in 2020, decisions had to be made whether or not to reduce your spending power for procurement, or should you increase it? And every business had to juggle that particular risk because of the human-induced recession, right? Because the recession came about as a decision to classify COVID as a pandemic. right? Everybody was in a frenzy, sorry. So making a decision whether to shut down a shipping, an assembly line, or making a decision whether to reduce your spending power on procurement, or whether to increase it to increase your reserves. I think it was gutsy because you had to do it. You did not know what the outcome was going to be,
Yes.
right? President Joe Biden promised that he would have ended the pandemic by summer last year in time for their Independence Day. And lo and behold came Delta. Sorry. Now we have the Omicron. Now we are hearing about the hybrid between the Delta and the Omicron. We don't even know if it still is going to be, any a variant of interest. But we don't know the likelihood of other mutations,
Yes.
right? So I try from where I sit, because I'm speaking on behalf of the public sector, sorry, the private sector right now. I don't think it is fair to judge
Yes.
any business or even the government or any entities for decisions that is made regarding the COVID and the pandemic itself. Because any decision that is made, it is actually going to be a risk. And from where I sit on a daily basis, my job, everything I do is a risk, right? And, again, general public, bear with us. We're doing our best. And we must prepare ourselves that for normalcy post this pandemic is not normalcy pre-pandemic.
Yes.
All right? So we know things are going to get better. It's a matter of when, but we have to work closely together.
I think that there are still some warehouses that are full, but they are basically filled with the wrong products.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So what happens then?
Yes, and then in the case of technology, let's use technology for example. I mean, technology, the evolution is fast, right? When you think about computers or tablets, etc. I mean, by tomorrow another generation is going to come out. Are you going to be holding all of this computer stock, right, for resale? I mean, Mr. Greenaway could confirm the duties on computers are next to nothing.
Yeah, next to nothing.
Next to nothing. So you're holding computers in your inventory, right? The generation change. I mean, what is your strategy about holding computer parts, etc., right? Especially when you have global supply shortage of chips, because you heard about the chip shortage. It still exists, That problem is still on the table, right?
So a lot of it depends basically on the economics of where certain things are made.
Yes.
Yes. And so, having to go through all the different channels and so you're proposing that perhaps we might want to think of expanding our manufacturing sector.
Precisely.
That is a possibility, and of course, in the short term, that is something that it can't necessarily happen, but we can look at the long term. And I think that from the ministry standpoint, we are trying to boost our manufacturing sector, because and you made a good point, whilst everything was happening and lockdowns and shutdowns, we were still called upon, as small as we are, to supply. So there is indeed potential for us. I think we just need to do the homework and look within ourselves to see where our potentials are, where our competitive advantages, so we can actually become a little more sustainable. I won't talk about food anymore, but in other ways, in building and in doing our stuff, because like if we have an issue with lumber, Everest, we have a challenge. Our young, at the same right now, the banks are giving concession, well, at least reduced prices for young home builders. But if you don't have the lumber, if you don't have the cement, if you don't have all these things, then it really becomes.
You can't build.
We can't
You
build.
can't
So-
build.
You don't have the raw
Yes.
materials, then you
Yeah,
can't.
you can't build.
You can't do
Yes.
you can't things. It's affecting basically everything.
Everything.
And I end where I started by saying that globalization, even though it was intended to bring about a level playing field, what we are seeing is that developing countries are most affected by what is happening. Because they are least industrial, they have very few manufacturing industries, footloose industries as well. And so what is happening is that we are more impacted than the larger manufacturing countries.
Yes, that is so. But we can also use our smallness as an advantage. I don't generally, maybe sometimes can come off the devil's advocate, but I do not generally believe that always small is bad.
No,
I think
small is not bad at all.
Smallness can also work at our advantage.
Yes.
You know, but we just have to know how and make the right choices. So, but yes, I agree. As a developing country, we are most impacted as it stands now. But all is not lost. I think that there's tremendous potential for us. But like I said, we have to talk to each other. We have to collaborate. And outside of being on the local front, in the regional and international, we have to build alliances. We have to start talking to other partners. Diversify
important.
in scope and
And we need to strengthen. I mean, we have regional alliances, but sometimes I don't know if they always work so well. And we have to look into putting more effort into strengthening them.
Yes.
Strengthening those alliances that we have within the region. Because we have them. They are there. But they are not always effective.
Why is that so? Support.
That's a discussion
For another
time. But I want to thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything that you want to say before we leave. Any parting words? Mr. Huggins, Mr. Greenaway, and Mrs. Warner-Reeves. No, I think we've said most of what we want to say.
Yes.
So I thank all three of you. We had Mr. Everest Huggins, who works at TDC as the Group Purchasing and Inventory Manager. We had the Deputy Controller of... Assistant, that's the difference. Assistant Comptroller of Customs, Mr. Desley Greenaway, and the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of International Trade, Mrs. Jasmine Warner-Weeks. Thank you to all three of you for coming and sharing on such a timely topic. We're all in this together. We will get through it together, but it's just that we have to make some choices that might be difficult. We have to cut certain things out, and we have to tailor our cloth to fit our coat, and we can't hang our hats higher than we can reach them. And that is just some old sayings from the, from long time that really are so important relevant for us to put into practice. Thank you to all of our callers to today's program, and those of you who listen to today's program. Thank you very much for being with us. Next week we will be back with another Working for You program. Until then, I am Lesroy Williams.
They had it broken.